Hi, everyone. Well, I'm really excited to moderate our next speaker. It's an absolute honor to have with us Gokul Rajaram. Gokul is a legend in Silicon Valley, if I can say that, and has had a massively successful career as the Googler who built AdSense and took it from zero to over a billion in revenue. In fact, he's dubbed the godfather of AdSense and later led ad platforms at Facebook as product director, helping grow revenue again to several billions and helped Facebook transitioned the advertising business to become mobile first. He then joined Jack Dorsey at Square to be head of product engineering and subsequently architected the sale of Square's food delivery business Caviar to DoorDash, where he's on the executive team. Gokul is also a super angel, having backed no less than 300 companies, including numerous that are now public companies. And you know what I love most about Gokul is his sharp product insights on LinkedIn, where he humbly calls himself company helper. So welcome, Gokul, and just thrilled to have you here.
Thanks, Atul. Great to be here. And hello, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but excited to have this discussion.
Yeah. And by the way, Gokul, I think I read somewhere, not to embarrass you too much, I think you were IIT JEE #2 and also got the gold medal at IIT Kanpur. So that's as smart as they come. Yeah. So let's get into it, Gokul. I guess my first question, looking at sort of the rear view mirror, what are some of your big career learnings building, AdSense, Facebook ads platform, Square, and now DoorDash?
Yes, thanks, Atul. That's a great question. Prior to DoorDash, I had three seminal experiences in my career, each of which changed how I think about the power of technology, leadership, and culture. The first was Google, which I joined when it was about 600 people, 600 or 700 people. At Google, I saw the power of stretching technology boundaries beyond what one might think possible. When I joined Google, on the first year, I realized that Google was testing a product called Caribou internally. It became Gmail later with 1 GB of free storage. Back then, you might remember Yahoo Mail had 10 megabytes of storage or free storage. So basically 100x improvement over what was deemed possible. And that kind of stuff just boggled your mind all the time. The goal was, how do you make something technologically far, it stretches the envelope of what is possible and use that to build incredible products. At Facebook, on the other hand, I saw the power of using inspirational goals and working backwards from them. Throughout the time I was there, Mark had a goal of 1 billion monthly active uniques as something that motivated all of us. And as soon as he reached that, he changed the goal to 1 billion daily active uniques. And so we worked backwards from that to figure out how to make that possible. At Square, I saw the power of great design to rethink extremely complex processes from first principles. Square is still the only company, I think maybe even in the world, where you can download a point of sale on your phone and start using it without any prior training. There's a company called Toast, which is public in the US. Even that is a large $10 billion company. Even for that, you got to go and install, you got to have training, weeks of training to understand how to use a point of sale. So something as complex as a point of sale, you can make it so that you or I, ordinary people, can just download and use it. So those are the three things I learned essentially. Great product leaders do all the above: leverage technology in unique and powerful ways, rally their teams through inspirational goals, and then build delightfully simple, easy to use products that help users achieve their objectives. So that's what I learned from each of those three companies.
Fantastic, Gokul. And those are fantastic insights, and it's very interesting. Not only have you been a massive product builder, but you've been a prolific investor, having backed over I think 300 companies and particularly a few here in India as well. So let me ask you, sort of what excites you about some of the India investments, and if you can share specific examples, Gokul, and overall, sort of this new breed of startups emerging out of India, including in DeepTech, and what can we look forward to on the global stage, in particular from India, from where you sit?
Yep, out of the 300 companies, I actually looked, I think a couple of weeks ago, about 20%, about 60 or so startups are headquartered in India, founded in India. But that percentage has grown massively over the last 2, 3 years. I think it was only 10%, and now almost 50% of our investments are in Indian companies on say 2023. The things I found most attractive with Indian companies are three. One, unique and differentiated technology or product. I think the first generation of Indian companies, outside of the outsourcing companies, they took concepts that have succeeded in the US or the West and built them for India. If you look at Make My Trip, Bazi, etc. Today's generation is building technology that's unique globally. For example, I'm an investor in a company called Dozy. They're there in Bangalore. Dozy is building a contactless medical device for remote patient monitoring. It's used in hundreds of Indian hospitals. What is powerful for me is that it's FDA certified and therefore has a potential to be used everywhere, not just in the US, but anywhere in the world, because they help alleviate nursing shortages, which are a huge part of the healthcare system where nurses are impossible to find and hire and train. So unique and differentiated technology globally. The second one, which is goes hand in hand, is a focus on global markets. The initial crop of Indian tech companies, internet companies, focused mostly on the Indian market, which I still think is a huge market because of demographics, because of digitalization, etc. So I think that's still a really good bet for B2C companies. But for B2B companies, I think it's critical to have a global lens. And you're seeing that now for the last 5, 10 years, more and more. I think there's more than 100 SaaS companies that are doing more than a certain amount of revenue and scale. For example, I'm invested in a company called WhatFix, which is a digital adaptation or adoption platform that enables organizations, customers, employees, etc., to figure out how to use their products easily. I think they had either Schlumberger or Halliburton in the US as their first customer. And I think every single customer of theirs has been in the US from day one, even though the company initially or even now is mostly in India. So global market focus. The third one is entrepreneur quality. The quality and caliber of entrepreneurs has increased dramatically. Part of it is, I think, there's been a deep pool of talent as successful companies in India now. So alums of those companies, as you all know very well, are emerging and are building the next generation of companies. So essentially differentiated technology and product, global focus, and entrepreneur quality, incredible entrepreneur quality. So if to summarize, if Indian tech ecosystem was a stock, it would be number one on my stock picking list globally, 100%.
Fantastic, fantastic. I mean, that's really good news for us, Gokul. And one of the questions, speaking to that, founders sort of struggle and grapple with is, when they hit certain product market fit and certain scale. As you mentioned, I mean, US is the holy grail market by far, right? So how should founders look at the US market? How should they see themselves initially? From your perspective, what are characteristics of some of those who have done that very successfully? Any examples you care to cite?
Yes. Like you said, the US, especially for B2B companies, I think you've got to, at some point, have the aspiration of going there. And I've seen two models succeed with respect to the US. First model is, I would call it the what fix model. From day one, focus in the US, get your initial customers in the US, and then build from there. So almost from the time you raise your first round of financing, you've got to do that. The second model is companies that first get to some level of scale in India and sometimes Southeast Asia and build the base there, perfect or improve the product operations engineering, and then move to the US as a second act. For example, there's a company called Pando. I invested in them 6, 9 months ago. Pando is a fulfillment cloud for enterprise supply chains used by lots of enterprises. They raised their seed and A, and with the seed and A, they built a fairly large business in India and Southeast Asia, servicing very large brands, Godrej and others. But then they used the B. After the A, they got to a certain scale, and then they used the B to then build out the US business. But one invariant across both kinds of models is that one of the founders has to move to the US. For WhatFix, Vara Kumar, who's one of the co-founders, he moved to the US several years ago. He's been in the US, lives not too far from me, actually. And then for Pando, Nitin, who's the CEO, he moved to the US about a year ago. Not just he, but a bunch of his leaders. I think he got 7 or 8 of his leaders to also move to the US. And I think the reason is it's not possible to delegate US market development to someone like a VP of sales. Only a founder mentality that is critical to open up this market is needed, and to understand customer needs and then engage with the team which is still in India. I think if you just hire a VP of sales who's by themselves, it's going to be very, very hard for them to communicate and understand what the product is, what the soul of the product is, and really bridge the gap. The only way to do that is for founders to move to the US. So I think if you want to crack the US market, you've got to have at least one of the founders move to the US. No doubt, either model.
Fantastic. No, those are very sharp, recommendations. Gokul, one of the things, speaking of that, we discuss a lot is, different stages of company building, what's called horses for courses, right? And what should founders focus on in each stage? Because they get a lot of gyan, as you know, right? And the stages, early stage, growth stage, scale up, etc., right? And, there are several pitfalls in going from one stage to the other, sort of crossing the chasm. From your perspective, how should founders think about that?
It's a great question. I think of companies as falling into 3 stages, like what you alluded to, Atul. The first stage is a startup stage where there has to be laser focus on product market fit and building predictability. And most of the company, I would say it's about 20 people or so typically. You don't want to go beyond 20, and most people are generalists at the company. There are some engineers, of course, but they're generally generalist engineers, and the business people are generalists. Then you get to the early growth stage, where essentially you have product market fit, and you're starting to put process and systems and structures into place around planning, execution, communication, people, all of those things to make sure that you can get to the third phase, which is a scale up or scale out phase, where you're scaling the leadership team, scaling the executive team, becoming a multi-product company, figuring out the right org structure, functional or otherwise. So those are the three stages. Now, for each stage, if you look at the mistakes, for the startup stage, the biggest mistake I think is around PMF, product market fit. Two kinds of mistakes. One is growing the team too much before one has product market fit. And the second one is building too much without understanding if your product market fit or not. So let's take a moment to talk about product market fit and what we should consider when we are thinking of product market fit. So two things I'd like to emphasize. One, product market fit is as much about solving the customer problem as it is about building a product or writing code. Especially with deep tech companies. We think about deep tech companies, it could take easily 1 or 2 years to build the product. And it could take so long that your customer needs could evolve and change by the time you're finished building the product when you start building the product. So it's super important to be deeply embedded within a company. And so in order, I would almost say, if you look at Palantir, right? Palantir is a great example. They are a deep tech company. And they essentially embed themselves really deeply and become almost a consultant to the company and figure out using no-code approaches, spreadsheets, etc. How do you solve that problem in a somewhat manual way to figure out what it takes to solve that problem? And then figure out if that approach works for a few more companies and then build your MVP. Essentially becoming a service provider before building a product. There's a security company here called Vanta, which used exactly the same methodology where essentially the thesis is instead of going and building something and then testing, especially with deep tech companies, it's much more important to understand the customer and be embedded in customers and then build the product almost together with the customer, the notion of design partners, if you will. The second is around the notion of PMF itself. PMF, the word product market fit, applies to a specific segment. No company has PMF for all segments and all customers to start with. You only have PMF for a segment or two, and then you slowly win more segments over time. If you're, in fact, I would say the corollary is if you're unable to articulate the segment you're PMF for, you probably don't have PMF. For example, Square had PMF just within the micro merchant segment. The product explicitly did not work for mid-market merchants, those in multiple locations, etc. And so just double down on that for several years, actually, just in the micro merchant space. So those are the two things. I think solve the customer problem more than writing code or building the product, especially with deep tech. And second, figure out how to articulate the segment in which you're PMF. You're never going to have PMF across all segments to start with. So that's around the startup phase, getting PMF. And really, I think the only thing that matters is getting to product market fit. The second phase is early growth. And within the early growth, like I said, it's putting processes into place. Now, the big pitfall here is putting too much process, so much so that you constrict innovation and speed, or so little that you get chaos. So the trick is to find the balance. How much process, what is the minimal amount of process you can put in so that trains keep running on time, execution happens on time, communication is, everyone is on the same page, but not so much that there is a massive bureaucracy be put into place. So that's one. The second pitfall is hiring executives too early. I'm a big believer in balancing homegrown talent with outside executives. I think a lot of founders, when they get to the early growth phase, they start getting starry eyes and start hiring a COO or a CFO or a CMO with big titles from big companies. And that can be the death of the company. I literally know companies that died because they hired a CXO too early. And I think you need a mix of both. And I think that can be a fatal mistake for the company. And then finally, especially in today's environment, in the early growth phase, you need to find a way to acquire customers in a capital efficient way because of the capital limitations of the next stage, which is the scale up stage. And scale up stage, I think, is where the paradigm has changed the most in the last few years. On the deep tech side, if you look at it, right, you look at a company like SpaceX or OpenAI or Anduril in defense tech, all of them have raised billions of dollars. But what do all of them have? SpaceX has Elon Musk, OpenAI has Sam Altman, Anduril has Palmer Luckey, who started it before Zenefits. The challenge is that outside of the small number of companies with exceptional superstar founders, it is going to be extremely hard to raise even $100 million, let alone $1 billion. So the challenge is, how do you do a scale up in deep tech, which actually requires a lot of capital, in a capital efficient way? It seems almost like a paradox. And I think the solution here is to really partner with strategics and potential customers. And a good example is a company, one of my portfolio companies called Runway ML. So Runway ML it's a leading AI for video. I think for the Series B, they got both NVIDIA and Google to come into the round and lead the round together. Because if you think about it, it makes sense because they work with NVIDIA for chips and GPUs, and Google is a cloud platform. And you can see with many of the AI companies like Anthropic and others, even OpenAI, for that big round, they had to go to a cloud vendor. So I think partnering with almost a codependent relationship, figuring out where that mutualism exists, and then going to one of those larger companies and partnering with them is, I think, a very powerful way. And I think more and more companies at that scale-up stage are going to pursue that. And I think part of it is you also need to leverage these partners for customer acquisition. OpenAI is getting a ton of customers from their Azure partnership. And I think there's no surprise. So I think that model, figuring out how to have alternate, I think the venture model is not going to work. In fact, it's going to be very hard to make work for that level increasingly, unless you're a superstar founder, even then it breaks. You've got to find an alternate source of financing. So I think that's I wouldn't say pitfall, but that's the thing to watch out for. The deep pockets available might not be available anymore.
Got it. No, fantastic. And I love that word mutualism. I'll remember that. So Gokul, what I really admire is you're known for your PM chops, and so very quickly, what would be your advice to PMs here in India be? How should they look at product management, and if you could back it up around what we are focused here on deep tech, that would be great.
The number one feedback I would have is to figure out how to think about product sensibility, how to develop their product sensibility. And the product sensibility there, I think most PMs over time have become really good at data science and analytics. But product sensibility and product thinking, in my definition of it, is the skill of figuring out what products to build in order to balance customer value and business value. And I think a lot of customer value and understanding customers is done qualitatively, not just quantitatively. I think PMs have lost the art of how to talk to customers, how to understand customers, how to have customer intuition. For example, if you look at OpenAI, they had an API product for several years. Even in 2022, they had an API product. They could have just stayed on with an API product, but it's product thinking that led them to launch ChatGPT, which basically not even a year old, right? I mean, it's launched in November of last year. Within a year, it's become one of the fastest growing, if not the largest, fastest growing internet app of all time. And I think that's the kind of product sensibility and product thinking you need to have. And I think a lot of PMs today need to develop that understanding of customer behavior, how to interview customers, and customer empathy, and understanding how customers are used. That's where the development is. That's what I would urge people. I think quantitatively they're excellent, but maybe at the expense of the qualitative stuff.
Fantastic. Great advice. So I think we're almost out of time. So quick fire, last question. What's your parting advice to entrepreneurs in India? Tactical advice, any commandments?
I don't know about commandments. Like I said, if the Indian tech ecosystem was a stock, it would be a number one global pick. That said, here's my humble pieces of feedback to the community. I always give feedback in terms of start, continue, and stop. What should you start? I think we need to have more people who don't just focus on building businesses or starting companies, but on solving problems, even if they don't result in companies. And some of them will result in companies, some of them won't. For example, if I think about Facebook, it resulted from Zuck solving a problem for his at Harvard. And Jack and Jim at Square, basically they solved Jim's problem of not being allowed to get his payment processing from banks. And Google started as a research product. I think we need more non-business problem solvers. Some of them become business and some don't. We need people to do problems, not just to build a business, but for play and for the genuine pleasure of problem solving. That's one. Start that. Would love to see more. Second, continue thinking globally. Build global companies. We have many, and I think that's going to continue. Don't keep your, I think you have the right talent, you have the right resources, infrastructure around you now, right mentorship, you can build global companies and you will build global. Continue that. Third, stop. Stop thinking about exits too early. I think if there's one thing to stop, I think focus on the long term. The best entrepreneurs think of building companies that can last for 50, 100 years. And I want to hear Indian companies not just saying, well, they're going to go public or this or that. Those are all going to happen. Think of how you can build a company that's 100, 200, 500 years old. That's what you need to build. Durable, enduring companies. Don't think of the exit.
Fantastic, Gokul. Well, that was just awesome advice and insights, and I know you really wanted to be here in person, and we'll plan that next year for sure. So with that, thank you, Gokul. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Atul, and thanks, Nasscom folks. Great to chat with all of you.